Hey guys, it's Adel, aka Aduki, and I'm back with another video. Before you watch this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my channel, and make sure you also follow me on Instagram too, which should be right there. I'm back with another video, and this time around I'll be listing my favorite albums that have been released this year. 2020 has been a crazy year altogether, but fortunately there were a good amount of records and music that were released this year. Now I won't be ranking my favorite albums of this year, but instead I'll be listing my favorite albums in terms of release dates. So I'll be starting with the earliest releases of 2020 up until the most recent. So without further ado, here are my favorite albums of 2020. Starting off is the guy who's constantly in the background of my videos, the guy right there over my shoulder, Mac Miller, and his album Circles. So Circles was released in January, and it's considered to be a companion album to his previous album, Swimming. Sadly, as you may all know, Mac Miller passed away in September 2018, 1 month after the release of Swimming, so this makes Circles most likely to be his final studio album release. Fortunately, Mac Miller was known to record a lot of music and basically live in the studio, so the plan was for Circles to be released about 6 months after Swimming. Now compared to Swimming, this album is more stripped back and it doesn't really have the heavy hip-hop, funk, and R&B influences that Swimming has. It's more acoustic and lighter sounding, and it's supposed to be stylistically different compared to Swimming, and the two different styles are supposed to complement one another in order to further this whole concept of the two albums swimming in circles. Basically, Mac had the blueprint and the foundation for the songs of this album, so the rest of the production was finished by John Bryan, who is a producer and composer who's worked with a lot of big-name artists and also scored some films. He was also a producer on Swimming and helped produce a few tracks on there. But yeah, the album has a very introspective feel and theme to it. There's a lot of themes about overcoming obstacles or going through all these frustrations and trying to overcome them. There's this whole theme continuing from Swimming where you basically have to stay afloat and swim along through all the troubles you go through in life, and basically those themes continue on this album. And this album ends with the song Once a Day, which basically concludes that if you're feeling down or suffer from depression or anxiety or going through a stressful situation, you could always pull yourself out of those situations and things will always be better. No matter the troubles and stress you go through, there will always be tomorrow and a new day to start afresh. And Mac Miller was very open about the troubles that he went through, whether it was depression, anxiety, or drug addiction. All those messages were evident in his songs, and he basically ended this album on a very optimistic note. This album has a more intimate and acoustic sound to it. It has a little bit of hip-hop in there, but it has a more experimental influence and more rock influences on it too. It kind of has like a very indie rock feel to it, like it reminds me of Death Cab for Cutie, and also reminds me a bit of the Beatles during their White Album era, or John Lennon's albums like Imagine or the Plastic Ono Band. This album just further showcases Mac's diversity when it comes to the sound of his music, and that he can't be categorized to just making rap music. He just pushed the boundaries of music and blended all these different styles of music together to create a unique sound that you can't really categorize. Overall, this has to be one of my favorite projects of this year, and this was a really great album in my opinion. Some of my favorite tracks on this album are Complicated, Blue World, which is a song that was actually produced by one of the guys from Disclosure, so that perfectly explains why it sounds very house and electronica sounding. Good News is a great song. I Can See, Woods, Hand Me Downs, and the bonus track Floating, which features Thundercat on bass, so that explains why it sounds very funky a bit. But overall, like I said, I would not skip a single track on this album. But yeah, that was Circles, one of my favorite albums by one of my favorite artists. Go listen to it if you have not listened to it yet. The next album on this list is The Slow Rush by Tame Impala. Now, Tame Impala has become one of my favorite artists within this past decade, and their previous album, Currents, I would consider to be one of my favorite albums of all time. They're a band that perfectly blends alternative rock, psychedelic, experimental, and funk all into one perfectly unique sound. I will say that I didn't like this album at first, but after giving some time and listening to it a bunch of times, I grew to like it. Personally, I had a lot of expectations to this album since it was the follow-up to to Currents, and to follow up a big album like Currents is very tough, and I was curious to see what they would make, especially that it was about 5 years between the release of Currents and this album. And before they released this album, Tame Impala released 2 singles, which were the songs Patience and Borderline, which had a very 70s R&B, funk, dance, disco-y sound to them, and I really liked those 2 songs, so it made me really optimistic about the Slow Rush. But this album continues the styles and sounds from the 2 previous albums, where it has a more funk, R&B, disco-y dance style, and it has actually more of a psychedelic sound compared to Currents. I originally had an issue with the track lengths of some of the songs because I felt like some of the songs got dragged out for too long. Now I don't really have any complaints about that because I do like the end of those songs where it feels like they're just jamming out and just continuing on the mood and groove of the songs. I always love the production on Tame Impala albums, which has a very vintage sound to it. They always implement a lot of delay-heavy guitars or psychedelic rock influences or nice funk R&B sounding bass or synths that just blow your mind. And on this album, they implement more dance and funk influences, which I really liked, and it just further shows that they're progressing and pushing their sound in the right direction. But yeah, some of my favorite tracks on this album are One More Year, Instant Destiny, Posthumous Forgiveness, which has a really nice beat switch in the middle of the song, Breathe Deeper, On Track, Is It True, and It Might Be Time. But yeah, that was The Slow Rush by Tame Impala. If you've never listened to them, go listen to them. The next album on this list is YHLQDMLG by Bad Bunny. Now, I don't really listen to that much Spanish music, but this album in particular helped me become more open to Spanish music. For those of you who don't know, Bad Bunny is a Latin trap artist who is actually the most streamed artist in the world. The production on this album is amazing, and it ranks amongst all the other great albums that have a very trap-heavy sound and influence. Whenever I listen to Bad Bunny, I'm reminded his music is very similar to very big name artists that I listen to, like Travis Scott, Young Thug, or A$AP Rocky. The production and sound of his music just reminds me of all these big name rappers, and the way that he delivers his flow, the way he sings with auto-tune, and the way that he sings all these melodies just reminds me of a lot of rappers today. But yeah, this album has a lot of different styles and influences in there, such as reggaeton, hip-hop, trap, dance, pop, and rock too. And I don't just see this as only a Spanish album, but also an album that just ranks amongst all the top selling and critically acclaimed albums of this year. But yeah, some of my favorite tracks from this album are Si Veo a Tu Mamá, La Difícil, Pero Ya No, Vete, La Santa, Bichial, B***R, and Hablamos Mañana. There are a lot of different moods and emotions I feel whenever I listen to this album. There are a lot of songs that you could just blast in your car because there are a lot of bangers on here. There are a lot of songs you could also dance to. And one of my favorite tracks on this album, Hablamos Mañana, which is the second to last track on this album, has a very heavy rock sound, so it just makes me want to mosh and bang my head to it. When you think the album is going to end in a big climax like that, it tones down and is more relaxed in a more intimate sounding song called Heart Emoji, or basically just a heart emoticon. But yeah, that song is just more toned down and intimate, and it has Bad Bunny being reflective of his life and all the fame and success he's achieved, and it's just a very nice stark contrast to the previous song that I mentioned. While we're on that note of Bad Bunny, another favorite album of mine is another album by him, which is El Ultimo Tour del Mundo. Bad Bunny released 3 albums this year, and El Ultimo Tour del Mundo is the third and final one, which was released in November. And this album is less trap heavy and has more of a rock influence in there. There are more drums, more guitars, and more of a heavy rock and alternative rock influence on it. The tones and productions of the song remind me of bands like Nirvana or Ozzy Osbourne, and they have more darker sound compared to the previous 2 albums he released. It was a nice surprise album released by Bad Bunny, and basically ended this year on a high note with a project like this. But yeah, I basically like all the songs on this album. I don't think there's a track that you would skip, starting off with the intro El Mundo es Mío, which sets a nice tone to the record, a nice dark sounding song which builds up to something bigger in the following tracks. And then you have tracks like Te Mudaste and Hoy Cobre and Maldita Pobreza and 120, which have more the upbeat trap and reggaeton influences. And then there's the song La Noche de Anoche, which has a feature from Rosalia, and she has a really nice voice and she sings really well on the chorus and complements Bad Bunny really well too. And you have songs like Haciendo Que Me Amas, Te Deseo Le Mejor, Yo Visto Así, Treas, and Booker T, which have more of the rock influences on them, and they're just straight out bangers right there. And I think this album is up there with Yo Haga Lo Que Me De La Gana, and I think Bad Bunny really had a big year in music, and he really didn't miss with his releases. The next album on this list is Eternal Atake by Lil Uzi Vert. Now, I've enjoyed Lil Uzi's music throughout his career, whether it's a few songs from his projects or the features from other songs by other rappers, but I admit that I haven't really liked a full project by his. So Eternal Atake is the first project by Lil Uzi Vert that I have fully enjoyed. Now, whenever I listen to Lil Uzi Vert, I'm not looking for deep meanings behind his songs or deep lyrics or wordplay and all that stuff, but the thing that Lil Uzi Vert does well is put you in a good mood. And whenever I listen to this album, I'm in a good mood. It makes me just want to turn up and just blast the music. It was about 3 years between the release of his latest album, Love Is Rage 2, and this one, so it was long awaited and there were a lot of expectations for it, and I think he delivered in this album. It's just a very fun record and what you would expect out of a Lil Uzi Vert project. Starting from the intro track Baby Pluto, you're just sent off into outer space or wherever Lil Uzi Vert wants to take you to. And the following segment of songs such as Lo Mein, Watch, and I'm Sorry are just very upbeat and just maintains that energy that's set off in the intro. That energy just continues throughout the project on songs like I'm Sorry and Pop, and then it tones it down a bit on songs such as Chrome Heart Tags, Prices, and Urgency, which has a nice feature from Sid from the internet. The final song on this album, P2, is basically a sequel to arguably his biggest song, which is EXO Tour Life. He basically used the same melody and sample and production from the original song, and basically the song ends with him thanking the listener and his fans for going on this journey of an album with him. And the album ends with 2 bonus tracks, which are Futsal Shuffle 2020 and That Way. And Futsal Shuffle 2020 was released before the new year, and that has to be one of my favorite songs by him. It always just puts me in a good mood, and it's just a straight up banger. And the song That Way is a nice song too. It actually samples the Backstreet Boys chorus from I Want It That Way, and I like how they incorporated that chorus into the song and just built around it, and it's a pretty nice song. Eternal Atake was a nice album, one of my favorites, and it just took me on a nice journey to Pluto or whatever outer space planet that Lil Uzi Vert wanted to take the listener to. My next favorite album of 2020 is After Hours by The Weeknd, and I've talked about this album so many times on the videos on my channel that I don't think I have to repeat myself too much on how I feel about this album. But to sum it all up, I think The Weeknd perfected the sound he has been working on over the course of his previous albums, that 80s funk, synth, new wave, R&B sound that he's been incorporating in all his other projects, and I think this album is just flawless. This album has a nice balance of darker, introspective songs and upbeat dance and trap influenced songs too. But yeah, some of my favorite tracks on this album are Alone Again, Too Late, Hardest to Love, Scared to Live, Snow Child, Heartless, Faith, Blinding Lights in Your Eyes. Basically the whole album at this point. There really isn't a track that I would skip. I feel like all the songs are cohesive and flow well into one another, and I think The Weeknd really just hit it out the park with this album. The next album I want to talk about is 3:15:20 by Childish Gambino. Now, Childish Gambino is one of my favorite artists, and I just like how he incorporates all these different styles of music together, whether it's hip-hop, R&B, funk, soul, and pop. It just manages to mix all these genres together and make some really good music. And this album was a surprise album too, and no one expected him to drop an album anytime, but he did release the album a week before its release date to stream on his website, and then a week later he just released the album on all streaming services. Now, this album has less of the funk, R&B, soul influences that you would have found in his previous album, Awaken My Love, and this one in particular has more variety and a broader range of sounds. There's some songs that have electronica influence on them, such as the song Algorithm, which has more of a dance, electronica, R&B kind of influence on there. And then there are some songs that are straight R&B, pop, hip-hop, such as Time, which has also Ariana Grande featured on there. And then there are some songs that have a more experimental hip-hop sound to there, such as the song that features 21 Savage. The one thing that bothers me the most about this album is that only 2 songs have names, which are the songs Algorithm and Time. All the other songs on the album are basically titled as the timestamps of where the song falls during the whole duration of this album. And that basically makes it hard for me to describe what songs I like, because I just don't remember the track titles on this album. But I do want to say that I really enjoy a lot of the songs on the album, because it does mix a lot of different genres of music together, blends all these different genres, and just gives a whole different unique sound. And it just further shows that Childish Gambino has a very distinct and unique ear when it comes to his music, and just shows how much of a true artist that he is. And I just want to say that this album does end on a high note, since the final track is this big grand song which has a big chorus of people singing and all these chanting, and it's basically celebrating life. And it just gives a whole message of optimism and that love can prevail even though we go through all these tough times, and especially how tough this year has been a lot of people. So it just does give a really big optimistic feel to the end of it. The next album on my list is Future Nostalgia by Dua Lipa. Now, Dua Lipa is one of those very few pop stars that I listen to, and I think she put out a very excellent record in this album. This album has more of like an 80s dance, pop, funk influence on there, and a lot of these songs are very catchy. This album is mature sounding, and there's a lot of songs that I do enjoy from this album, such as Future Nostalgia, Don't Start Now, Cool, Levitating, Hallucinate, Break My Heart, and Love Again. But yeah, overall it's a very consistent album. It's very upbeat, and all the songs mesh well together. But yeah, this is probably my favorite pop album of the year, and that's pretty much all I have to say about Future Nostalgia. The next album on my list is It Is What It Is by Thundercat. This is another album that stood out to me this year, and I always find myself coming back to this album. Thundercat plays the bass so fast and so frantically that it makes you feel like you're going at 1,000 miles per hour, and everything is so fast and so many things are happening at the same time when you're listening to this album. And Thundercat mixes a bunch of different genres in there, such as funk, R&B, neo-soul, and hip-hop. A lot of the songs are so fast-paced and short that they just transition well to one another, and it just is a nice groove that you don't even know that it's switched over to the next song, because they all just blend well and go seamlessly well into one another. And this album goes through different moods and different dynamic shifts. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the album, it's more frantic and upbeat and fast-paced, and then by the time you get to the middle of the album, it just chills out and calms down a bit. Two of my favorite songs of this year are on this album in the middle part, which are Black Quails, which features Steve Lacy and Childish Gambino, and the song Dragon Ball Durag, which are just two nice groovy moods, which is a nice R&B funk influence and just puts me in a nice chill groovy mood. And the last part of the album has a more introspective and somber tone to it, as you can see in the songs King of the Hill and the song Fair Chance, which features Lil B and Ty Dolla $ign. And I really like Ty Dolla $ign's part in that song, because I just love his vocals and they just really complement the whole tone and production behind the song. And also the final song, which is the title track, It Is What It Is, which is very somber and introspective, and it actually ends with a more jam session at the end, which is a nice ending to this album. Yeah, the production and instrumentation of this album is just completely fantastic, and the album was also co-produced by Flying Lotus. And this is a very fantastic album. If you want to listen to more funk, R&B sounding music with a lot of experimentation, I would recommend It Is What It Is by Thundercat. Next album on my list is The New Abnormal by The Strokes. And this is another album that I've talked about a bunch of times throughout my other videos. This is actually the first vinyl that I unboxed on this channel too. But yeah, this is hands down one of my favorite albums that's come out this year, and The Strokes are always going to be probably my favorite band or top 2 favorite bands. I talk about this album more in depth in my unboxing video for it, but just to sum it all up, I feel like this album is more cohesive and there's a really high chemistry between all the members of the Strokes compared to their previous albums. And this one sounds a little more focused on the sound, and they do experiment with a little different influences in there. Like you hear some 80s new wave and more experimental rock in there too. I feel like the Strokes were able to recapture the sound for what made them really popular and what made them really influential, and this is a really great effort that they put out for this album. I like all the songs on this album. There really isn't a track that I would skip, so if you really haven't listened to the Strokes or this album, you should really go ahead and listen to it. Another favorite album of mine from this year is Petals for Armor by Hayley Williams. For those who don't know, Hayley Williams is the lead singer of the band Paramore, and this year she released her first solo album. And if you're familiar with Paramore's music, this album sounds completely different to what you would expect, and that's something that I do like about this album. This album has more experimental influences, a more indie rock sound, a more art rock kind of sound to it. Some songs on here are very upbeat and have a very dance vibe to it with a lot of synths in there, and then there are some songs in here that sound very intimate. This album reminds me of the music of Radiohead, or specifically their album The King of Limbs, and also reminds me a bit of Vert too. Music on this sounds great. The production is amazing. It's completely different to what you would expect from Paramore's previous music, because Paramore is more alternative rock, and then in their latest album After Laughter was more 80s new wave influences and pop influences, but this one, like I mentioned, has more of like an art rock, experimental indie rock influence on there too, and it's just a very refreshing sound. And Hayley Williams performs very well on this album too. I think, in my opinion, she has one of the best voices in all of music across any genre, and her performance on this album is just on point. The lyrics are great, and so are the themes, and some of the themes behind this album are independence, loss, depression, and empowering oneself. And this album was released in 3 separate parts, where there were 3 5-song EPs released at a time. The third part was released when the full album was released, and I could say that I'm a bigger fan of the second and third part, so the last 10 songs out of the 15 songs of the album. I do like several songs from the first third of the album, but I think that the last 2/3 of the album really pick up, and there's really the strongest songs on the latter part of the album. Like some songs such as Dead Horse, Over Yet, Pure Love, they're all very upbeat and very dancey, and they put me in a good mood. And there are more intimate sounding songs on this album, such as My Friend, Roses, Lotus, Violet, Iris, Why We Ever, Taken, and Crystal Clear. And in particular, the song Roses, Lotus, Violet, Iris features the band Boy Genius, which consists of Phoebe Bridgers, Lucy Dacus, and Julian Baker. And then in that song, you basically have 4-part harmonies going on, and it just sounds absolutely beautiful. And that song and the 2 following songs, Why We Ever and Pure Love, probably has the best vocal performances that I've heard from Hayley Williams on any record that she's been a part of. But yeah, I really enjoyed this album. It's something I did not expect out of Hayley Williams, and it's really refreshing to hear something different from an artist that you don't really expect them to put out this type of music, and I would suggest it to anyone to give it a listen. The next album on my list is another EP from a local artist, which is Petals by Favors. Now, Favors is the project by one of my friends, Full, and I actually interviewed him for one of my episodes of Podeki on my channel. But to sum it all up, his project has influences that range from indie rock to alternative rock to dream pop. If you're a fan of artists such as Radiohead, Bon Iver, Sigur Rós, or early Coldplay, I would recommend you would listen to this project. There are a lot of acoustic guitars and a lot of experimental moments in there with keyboards and electric guitars that provide a very unique sound. And also the singer, Kayla, has a really beautiful voice, and it reminds me of Billie Eilish, and her voice really complements the music very well. It puts me in a really relaxed mood, and I was really impressed by the production and how this debut EP turned out to be, because my friend Full is probably one of the most talented musicians that I know, and this project really turned out so well for a debut EP. So you should go stream Favors and their debut EP, Petals. The next album on my list is Carpe Diem by the Foes of Fern. For those of you who don't know, the Foes of Fern are another local New Jersey band where one of my friends, Matthew Fernicola, is the frontman / guitarist. I actually interviewed Fern on one of my episodes of Podeki on my channel, and we talked about the whole release of this album and the making of the album. They're more of an alternative rock band which blends a lot of different genres of rock in their music, and if I were to describe their music is very similar to the Beatles or Arcade Fire or The Strokes. But yeah, Fern is one of the most talented musicians that I know, and he's a really, really great guitarist, and there's some parts of the songs on this album where he just shreds like crazy on the guitar. He's a really great music arranger too, because there are so many diverse arrangements on this album. The compositions on this album sound so beautiful because you have so many diverse sounds on here and so many different instruments in the mix. You'll hear some songs that have steel drums and other percussive instruments, and then you'll hear another song with a full-on string orchestra, and then you'll have another song that has trumpets and tubas and trombones. And the good thing about this album is that a lot of songs give off a lot of feels because of the different instruments implemented. So they somehow blend well together and they just give you a different feel for each song. You'll find some songs are just straight up alternative rock, such as the opening track Lydia, Out of Our Heads, The Monkey, and Maria Maria. There's some songs like Play It Back and Simple and Plain, which gives a very nice summery vibe to it. And then you have a few songs on here that tone down a bit and serve as like a bridge between the beginning and the end of the album, such as Carpe Diem, Sunday, and April Came in the Rain. And the songs Carpe Diem and Sunday are the ones that have very heavy string arrangements, so they just give you that nice relaxed mood. And then the two final songs on the album, Bike Song and Ghost, have probably the biggest choruses out of all the songs on this album. Bike Song has a really big chorus, and whenever I go to any Foes show, the whole crowd is usually singing along to the chorus, and it has a very big like kind of doo-wop R&B rock type of vibe to it. And then the final song, Ghost, is basically another big chorus song where people sing along with, and then it just kind of just builds up at the end of the album, just culminating it with big guitar solo at the end and all these different instruments just coming in. And yeah, it's a nice ending to this album. This album took several years to record, and I was really impressed with the end result, and I was so glad to finally hear these songs that I've been hearing for so long at their live shows to be on an album and a studio version of these songs. So now I could really just listen to them at my own convenience. And yeah, it's probably my favorite album that's come out of the Asbury Park music scene. But yeah, if you're really interested in finding new artists and if you're really into alternative rock music, I would recommend the Foes of Fern's album, Carpe Diem. The next album on this list is Puncher by Phoebe Bridgers. Hands down, one of my favorite albums of this year and one of the best new artists that I discovered within the past year. So the unboxing video that I did for this record is my most viewed video on my channel. So thank you to whoever watched the unboxing video for this record here. Since I already unboxed this album and talked a lot about it in my unboxing video for it, I'll just say that this album has indie rock, acoustic, and emo influences on it, and the songs on this album tackle messages such as overcoming the tension between one's inner and outer self, and also overcoming traumatic experiences, and also realizing the end of all things, whether it's a relationship or just like the end of the world. But yeah, this album has very intimate moments, and then there's some songs that are just straight rock bangers on there too, which is a very nice contrast to the whole tone of the album, which is more low-key and intimate. And I like every song on this album. There isn't a song I would skip, and all the songs are cohesive and flow well into one another. And like I stated before, there are more intimate sounding songs on this record, such as Garden Song, Punisher, Halloween, Moon Song, Savior Complex, and Graceland 2. Then there are other songs on this album too which are very upbeat, such as Kyoto, Chinese Satellite, I See You, and I Know the End. And the final song, I Know the End, I really like the outro on that because it's a nice build up to this big chaotic mess of things, and as if the world is coming to the end. And there are a lot of screaming that goes on at the end of this track, and it makes me want to go in my car, put this song on, drive, and then when that part comes up, it makes me just want to scream my lungs out too, which is kind of a cathartic release. And I've done it before to that song listening in the car, and it feels good when I scream in my car during that part. But besides that, it's a very nice chaotic end to this record, and it basically sums up this year too, which has been very chaotic. But yeah, if you haven't listened to Punisher, go listen to it. The next album on my list is Run the Jewels 4 by Run the Jewels. For those of you who don't know, Run the Jewels is a hip-hop duo that consists of Killer Mike and LP, and they're probably the best hip-hop duo and one of the top hip-hop artists and acts out right now. And in their music, they always talk about issues such as racial injustice, racial inequality, and other society issues that involve race. And this album couldn't have dropped at a perfect time this year. This year was very stressful, intense, and with all the racial injustices and police brutality cases such as the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and all the other racist attacks on minorities and people of color, this album couldn't have dropped at a perfect time, like I said before, because this album explores all those themes that I mentioned before and all the things that people were protesting about. The production is great, and Killer Mike and LP both do a great job rapping on here and spreading the message they're trying to say behind the songs. And just starting with the opening track, Yankee and the Brave, episode 4, it's just very chaotic and fast-paced and just hits you hard. It just sets the tone of what the album's gonna sound like. That chaotic energy and message never stops and just maintains throughout the whole album as such in the following tracks, Ooh La La, the following track, Out of Sight, which has a nice verse from 2 Chainz, who's one of my favorite rappers. Then in the following song, Holy Calamafuck, which is very hard-hitting and it has a very nice beat switch in the middle of the song. There are other great features on this album, such as on the track Walking in the Snow, which has a feature from Gangsta Boo on the chorus, which adds a lot of attitude to the song. And then on the following song, Just, it features both Pharrell Williams and Zach De La Rocha, who are 2 artists that I really enjoy their music. Zach De La Rocha being the lead singer of Rage Against the Machine, and they are very similar in terms of messages and themes behind their music compared to Run the Jewels. And the songs that follow are still consistent, and they're a really high quality songs, such as Never Look Back and the song Pulling the Pin, which features Mavis Staples, and she adds a lot of soul and a very climactic end to the album. Like I said, this album is really consistent, the songs are great, the production is great, the guest features are awesome, and the message is strong on this album too. The next album on my list is Limbo by Amine. I'll start off with saying that I think Amine is one of the most underrated rappers out there, and I've enjoyed his music from his previous projects. And this project really impressed me because a lot of the songs on here sounded more diverse, where it implemented more hip-hop and R&B and some soul aspect. I really like the way he raps on this album. I really like his flow. I really like the cadence and the delivery he brings off in all the songs. The production on this album is great too because it's more stripped back, and then when there are samples used in some of the songs, those samples really provide a lot of character to the song. There's one song on this album called Shimmy, which samples Old Dirty Bastard's song Shimmy Shimmy Ya, and I really like that song because I really like the way that Amine raps and his flow on that song is, and I just really like how he sampled Shimmy Shimmy Ya. And there are very strong features on this album too, such as Young Thug on the song Compensating. Young Thug's one of my favorite rappers, and I think he really delivered a great verse on there. And also Slow Tie and Vince Staples on the song Pressure in My Palms. I think they both also contributed a great feature too, and that's one of my favorite songs on the whole project. Also, the hip-hop group Injury Reserve are featured on the song Fetus, and they also provide great introspective lyrics that tie in with the themes of that song. Also, there's more R&B and soul features on this album too, such as Summer Walker on the song Easy, and Jid and Charlie Wilson on the song Roots. That's one of my favorite songs off this album, and I really think that Charlie Wilson added a lot more soul and really built the emotion and character in that song too. And finally, on the final track of the album, My Reality, features a surprise feature from Daniel Caesar, and he's one of my favorite artists today, and I really like the outro he provides to that song. It really concludes that album on a really good note too. I think Amine really delivered with this project. It's really consistent from the top to the bottom, and I would say that it has a nice mixture of upbeat hip-hop and R&B hip-hop songs on here, and it just really shows how much of an up-and-coming artist that Amine is. So I would recommend Limbo by Amine. The next album on my list is The Jesse Volume 3 by Jacob Collier. And Jacob Collier is a musician, composer, and musical arranger who is known to basically take these big, well-known popular songs and just rearrange them like crazy and add all these different choruses of people and harmonies for all the instruments and all this different instrumentation on there too, and it just really blows my mind how musically talented he is. And the way that he mixes all these different genres on this album, it gives you a different mood and vibe to each song. Like, each song is very unique in its way. Like, for example, in one of the opening songs, Count the People, he has Jessie Reyez and T-Pain featured on the song. And Jessie Reyez, she provides a nice singing chorus, and then T-Pain at the end of the song, he provides a really great singing part where it's like he's some choir conductor or he's all the choir members too at the same time, and just providing a really big soulful voice of his. And you have Jacob Collier throughout the whole song just rapping at like a million beats per minute as if he were Twista or Eminem singing on Rap God or Godzilla, just speaking and rapping at so many syllables and words per second. It's crazy. Then you have more upbeat funk and dance influence songs such as the song In My Bones, which features Kimbra, and then the song Sleeping on My Dreams, which is also has to be one of my favorite songs on that album too. And then you have more R&B pop influenced songs such as Running Out of Love featuring Tori Kelly, and she sings really well on that track. And then there's a song All I Need, which features Mahalia and Ty Dolla $ign, and like I mentioned before, Ty Dolla $ign, anything he's featured on, he just delivers, and he really has a great contribution there. And then one of my favorite songs on the album too, Time Alone With You, features Daniel Caesar, and I just really love that song. It's a nice chill R&B song. But yeah, the album ends with the song He Won't Hold You, and it's more relaxed and more harmonious, and it's more low-key, and features the rapper Rhapsody just delivering a verse and spoken word, and it's a really nice, cool end to it. And yeah, this album is very diverse in sound. There's a lot of upbeat moments, there's a lot of low-key relaxed moments, and I would recommend this album too. The next album on my list is Imploding the Mirage by The Killers. Now, The Killers is one of my favorite bands, and I really love their music, and I really think that their first 3 albums are considered rock classics of 2000s rock music. This album has more of the influences that you would expect from a Killers album, such as alternative rock, arena rock, and synth rock, and new wave influences, but this album also has a very heavy heartland rock influence too. There are a lot of aspects of this album that remind me of artists like Bruce Springsteen. But yeah, the production is really nice on here, and there are a lot of very anthemic songs that you could imagine them performing well in an arena or a festival or any of their shows with just a big sound to it, and I really like the songs on this album. There's some songs such as Fire and Bone, Lightning Fields, Running Towards a Place, which I say that has a very Bruce Springsteen kind of feel to it, and even the intro song My Own Soul's Warning has a very Bruce Springsteen vibe to it, and it's a really nice intro that starts off kind of slow and then just progresses to like a big sound and a big bang. And yeah, you'll find a lot of songs on here with like very big choruses and very emotional vocals. Brandon Flowers is one of my favorite singers, and there are a lot of songs of The Killers that I really like because of just the whole formula of having a very big anthemic chorus and just very strong vocals with a lot of emotion and precision. And I think they really delivered on all aspects of the music, from production to the vocals. And this album ends on a very triumphant note on the song Imploding the Mirage. And Like I said, it just sounds like you just overcome obstacles, and it's very triumphant, and it's a very fitting end to this album. So I would recommend Imploding the Mirage by The Killers. The next album on my list is Savage Mode 2 by 21 Savage and Metro Boomin. Now, 21 Savage isn't really one of my favorite rappers, but I do enjoy some of his music. I do believe that his most recent projects have really improved a lot compared to his earlier works, and I've started to grown to like him more. But when I saw this project was going to be produced by Metro Boomin, I was pretty optimistic about it, because whenever 21 Savage and Metro Boomin come together to make music, it always sounds good, such as on the projects Savage Mode and Without Warning. I feel like that Metro Boomin's beats and production really mix well together with 21 Savage, because Metro Boomin's beats are usually dark, and 21 Savage's lyrical content is more darker and sinister in a way, so I feel like those two really mix well together. And what's crazy is that they got Morgan Freeman to narrate throughout parts of the album, such as the intro and some interludes and the outro, and that's crazy. You get Morgan Freeman to basically narrate your album. You really have Morgan Freeman on this album talking about the difference between a snitch and a rat, and it's just very like bone chilling in a way to hear Morgan Freeman talk about those topics, and it's really adds to the motif and dark sound of this album. The whole album kind of gave these like horror movie vibes to it, and I do believe that 21 Savage and Metro Boomin both delivered and creating the sound of an album that perfectly describes that. And then when you add in Morgan Freeman to narrate that, it kind of really sets the whole tone and gives a visual aid to the album, and yeah, he does a great job on that end too. The next album on my list is Song Machine Season 1 Strange Times by The Gorillaz. They're really one of the most diverse sounding artists out there, and they implement so many different genres of music into their songs, such as hip-hop, rock, and electronica, and they really just make some of the most unique songs out there. And they're also able to get a lot of different guests on their albums too, and the good thing about that is that each song kind of gives off a different vibe and just sounds unique from one another. But yeah, the production on this album is great, and there's so much stuff that's going on that even until now I'm still having time to digest and process what's going on. There's just so many different genres of music that are just blended into each song. Like there's a lot of experimentation, there's a lot of hip-hop and electronica mixed together, there's rock and electronica mixed together. It's just like a really crazy sounding album. There are a lot of guest features on this album too, such as Robert Smith from the band The Cure, Beck, St. Vincent, Schoolboy Q, Peter Hook, who is from the band New Order, also Slow Tie and the band Slaves. And there's also a song that has Black and Elton John on the same track. But yeah, like I stated before, each song is just like very unique in its way, how they blend all these different genres together, and then how they feature the specific artist each song, as if they kind of cater the song to the guest artist, and then they also just implement the different styles, and it just makes a very unique sounding song. There's so many different sounding songs on here, it's more of like a soundtrack, and I'm okay with that. I really just enjoy the music on this album, and if you really like the Gorillaz, I think you would enjoy this album too. The next album on my list is featuring Ty Dolla $ign by Ty Dolla $ign. Now, Ty Dolla $ign is one of my favorite voices in hip-hop and R&B, and whenever he is featured on a song, I just instantly enjoy the song. And that basically explains the title of this album, featuring Ty Dolla $ign, because if it's said that the song is featuring Ty Dolla $ign, it's gonna be a banger, and that's true. But now this album is his own album, and he has other people featuring him with him too, and I'll say that it's just a really consistent album from top to bottom. Even though there's 24 songs on this album, the songs are relatively short, so they just transition from one song to the other, and I felt like I got through this album really quickly. And like I said before, it's just a very consistent hip-hop R&B album. And there's so many guests on this album too, such as Kid Cudi, Kanye West, Post Malone, Anderson .Paak, Thundercat, Young Thug, Future, Jhené Aiko, Black, Gunna. There's probably people that I missed too, but they really all deliver on each track that they're featured on. And I feel like Ty Dolla $ign also delivers on his end too, so he's not really overshadowed by his guests, but the songs are really well crafted. They're nice melodies and they're really nice sounding hip-hop R&B mixed sounds on there. Now the final album on the list of my favorite albums of 2020 is Man on the Moon 3, The Chosen by Kid Cudi. Kid Cudi is one of my favorite artists. I grew up listening to him. I still consider Man on the Moon 1 and Man on the Moon 2 to be hip-hop classics, and his influence just runs deep for a whole generation of rappers and other musicians. Now, this album came as more of a surprise release because he announced 1 week before its release date that he would release Man on the Moon 3. And with this album being the final installment of the Man on the Moon trilogy, there's just really high expectations on my end for it to deliver. And in my opinion, Kid Cudi delivered. And on this album, you'll find the things that he usually talks about in his songs and his music, such as depression and overcoming obstacles and being at peace with oneself and freeing oneself. And I feel like this album was a nice solution to the end of this year. This year has been very stressful, tension-filled, and very chaotic, and Kid Cudi releasing an album is kind of like medicine in a way. And then when you hear him talking about these issues and overcoming them on this album, it's very relief-filled, and it's like a release of emotions and energy when you listen to this album. The production on this album is really great, and he was working with Dot the Genius again, who produced a lot of his early work. And when you listen to this album, I feel like that Kid Cudi kind of just sends you on a trip in his own world, and just him trying to just overcome all of these obstacles. He's mirroring his message to other people who go through the same obstacles and problems as he does, and you want to root for him to succeed and overcome them, just like he wants the listener to overcome and succeed and be successful and be at peace with oneself. And yeah, the message on his music is always reassuring to the listener, and he always just wants people to be okay with themselves. I said before, in the beginning of this album, it's like you're on this trip with him and you're just going along with the ride and the vibe of it. And there are a lot of bangers in the beginning of this album, such as Tequila Shots, She Knows This, Dive, Damaged, Heaven on Earth, Another Day. And a lot of these songs too implement what he's famous for, and that's the humming. But yeah, Kid Cudi's humming is very soothing and therapeutic, and it just adds a lot more character and emotion to his songs. And I think the production of this album just blends so well, whether he's rapping or he's singing or he's humming or whatever mood that he just gives up, it just mixes so well together. It's so cohesive. Some tracks on this album that I really like and want to highlight are Elsie's Baby Boy, which is more of like an interlude that serves between the two halves of the album, and it just has him talking about his life growing up with his family, and it does implement a nice guitar that's constantly going on throughout the song, and it's a very nice song. Also the song The Void, which basically encapsulates the whole mood and feeling of this album, where he just talks about trying to overcome the biggest obstacles in his life and not having these obstacles bring him down and just overcoming them. And another song that's a highlight to me is the song Lovin' Me, which actually features Phoebe Bridgers on there. And I wouldn't expect Phoebe Bridgers and Kid Cudi to have a song together, but the way that they harmonize their vocals just works so perfectly. And the album ends on a high note with the last two tracks, For the Kids and Lord I Know. And the message on the song For the Kids is basically a message to his fans saying that he's there for the people who support him, who go through the same troubles as he does, and he basically just encourages his fans and young people to, you know, just turn this song up, listen to the message in this song, and you'll be okay. And then on the song Lord I Know, it's basically him tying up the ends of like going through all the troubles he has and acknowledging them, and that on the path that he's going on is a very good path, that he could just overcome all the problems and obstacles because all those things he's overcome has made him a stronger person. But yeah, this has to be one of my favorite albums of this year. It was a nice surprise, and I was really satisfied with the album, and I think it ranks among one of his best albums too. And that is my favorite albums of 2020. I'm going to thank you guys for taking the time to watch this video. If you liked all the albums that I mentioned in this video, comment below what you liked. If there's some albums that you like that I didn't mention and that I didn't really give a chance to listen to, recommend me some albums that I didn't mention and just comment below. And I know I'm losing my voice after talking after all this time, but I'm going to go now, give my voice a break. And also just don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys, and I'll see you guys next year.